Welcome, everybody. This is the Hormone Balance Naturally program. I'm Katy Wallace. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Madison, Wisconsin. Before we begin, I'd like to say that this information is for health education reasons only and should not be taken in place of medical advice or taken as medical advice. Next month, I'm going to be talking about food-based cleansing, which I'll give you a little bit of background today because it can be a helpful tool for hormone balancing. That program will be the last Wednesday in August at 12 o'clock. So today what we're going to cover is 4 priorities for healthy hormones. And I would preface this by saying that a lot of people may feel like their hormonal issue is dealt with maybe a little too simplistically, or maybe just in general as a culture. I think we either think as someone's hormones are shifting that one, that's just natural and we should just let it be that way, like in the case of menopause, or 2, that the person, because they're having hormone problems, needs to apply a medical prescription hormone. And there are definitely cases where that is necessary, but I would say in my experience, and this has been my training from other practitioners too, that many people who have hormonal problems, they're making adequate hormones. It's these other 4 priority areas that are getting in the way of them balancing hormones. So that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. We're going to talk about healthy blood sugar control because your blood sugar control has a huge impact on how you make and metabolize hormones. We're going to talk about the importance of fatty acids and having the right fats in your diet and why that's so important for hormones. We're going to talk about the importance of the liver. Liver biotransformation or liver detoxification is how your body eliminates the hormones that it no longer needs. So a lot of people will have a hormone imbalance because they need more liver support. And finally, the importance of the gut in eliminating hormones you don't need or absorbing the correct nutrients that you need to build the right hormones for yourself is really important. And sometimes the gut also is playing an important role with chronic inflammation, which is accompanying a hormonal picture for someone. So we'll get into that. So I'm going to talk about these 4 priorities, and then at the end of the talk, I'll talk a little bit about people who have had hormone testing, some of the most common patterns we see, and natural ways that you can address a hormonal imbalance without prescription. So just talking about some of the natural alternatives that are out there. Okay, as I said, the majority of people actually probably making plenty of hormones, but they have a hormone imbalance because of these other areas, these physiological processes happening in the body. So we're going to go through each one of these: blood sugar, fatty acids, detoxification, and gut flora. So first, we're talking about blood sugar balance. Basically, when you eat a food high in sugar, so that could be like a dessert or a candy, or it could be like a piece of bread or a piece of fruit or another whole food that's very starchy, that is going to raise your blood glucose level and cause your body to make insulin. Insulin is the hormone your body needs to get the glucose into the cell. The problem is, as we're aging and as we eat more carbs, we make more and more insulin. It's called insulin resistance. And the downstream effect on this is very, very strong on our hormones. So for men will experience a decrease in testosterone. For women, we may experience an increase in testosterone. So that would be like when you eat a sugary food and your body is more prone to have an insulin surge, it can upregulate the enzymes that are taking your basic hormones, progesterone and estrogen, and converting them into testosterone. So for example, this happens in a condition like PCOS, or some women as they're aging experience more acne or more facial hair or even baldness. That's because when they have a surge of sugar, their body is more susceptible to metabolizing their hormones into testosterone, which will result in those things. So sugar can affect testosterone levels both with men and with women. Also, it can affect estrogen and progesterone. For men, as they eat more sugar and they're insulin resistant, they will convert the testosterone into estrogen and become more estrogen dominant. which is not ideal. For women, estrogen and progesterone will often shift, and majority of women, like everybody's a little different, and this is where testing at the individual level is important, but the majority of women will experience estrogen dominance when they have a diet that's too high in carbohydrates for them, because they're going to take that extra insulin surge is going to result in the body taking their progesterone and converting it to more estrogen. So women can either get more testosterone or more estrogen from foods high in sugar, and that can result in a lot of different health problems. So there's problems in eating too many carbohydrates, and I'm going to try to give you some techniques for starting to think about that. For a talk on balancing hormones naturally, there is a lot to cover. So some of these concepts, I'm just going to be kind of giving you an overview, and I'm not going to be getting into the nitty-gritty. If you have questions at the end and we have time, I would be happy to answer specific questions about things, but I just want to preface by saying, I'm trying to give you a broader scope of these multiple things that affect our hormones, and it can be complex, and you may need to make changes on several different fronts in order to really truly feel like you're balancing your hormones. So we started with blood sugar control, and I was talking about how eating foods too high in carbohydrate creates problems. But if you have low blood sugar, which can be caused from too many carbohydrates or just caused from not eating enough, then that can create problems too. So with blood sugar, it's a little tricky. You don't want it to be too low, and you don't want it to be too high. For example, if a person is skipping meals or waiting too long to eat, that might happen with a busy mom. And I'm getting some feedback here, so I'm gonna mute people. All right. I think they're good, but it still sounds like someone online isn't muted. There we go. Okay. So as I was saying, oops, a busy mom who's maybe not taking the time to really get a nourishing meal, or a busy person who's just got a lot crammed in the middle of their day. A high school student might feel like there's not enough time to pack a healthy lunch or sit down. So there's lots of different situations where people are just waiting more than 3 or 4 hours to eat a nourishing meal, and then they're going to be experiencing a blood sugar swing, which is going to set them up for some hormonal problems. One of the hormonal problems that happens when you have this type of behavior is you see a lot of dysregulation in cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone made in the adrenals, and its job is to get the fuel into your cells when you're under stress. So naturally, we make cortisol when we're fasting. So like when we wake up and we break our fast with breakfast, our cortisol is very high. So you want to be very thoughtful about what you're eating then. Don't want to eat a high carbohydrate food at breakfast, because your cortisol is already high. And so it's going to create a big blood sugar swing for you. So it's better, for example, to eat protein and fat when you break your fast. Maybe if you're going to be very active right after breakfast, you might include some carbohydrate for that activity level. But in general, if you're sedentary, it's probably better to move the carbohydrates to lunch and dinner after you've broken your fast. And this can help with hormonal balance and with some of the different hormone symptoms that people have, like just feeling lethargic, feeling like that brain fog after they eat. So when you're not eating on a schedule, or maybe you're fasting too long at night, for most women, you don't want to be fasting more than 14 hours from the end of dinner to breakfast, because especially as we're aging, we make more and more cortisol more easily. And so sometimes, even though there can be a lot of benefits to intermittent fasting, it's sort of setting a woman up for more cortisol surges, which work against her. So when you make more cortisol, you're going to feel more anxious, you're going to feel keyed up, maybe even hangry, and you're going to be more likely to store fat around your belly, have trouble sleeping because the cortisol is dysregulated. So the solution to this is to be eating meals consistently and eating protein every 3 to 4 hours to help with balancing the cortisol and other adrenal hormones. The other problem that stems from blood sugar swings is that you can make a lot of triglycerides. So when you eat more carbohydrates in a sitting than your body can handle, it's going to store them as triglycerides. And this is like, if you've ever had that feeling where you want to fall down on the couch and take a nap after a meal, you're making triglycerides. It takes a lot of energy to store that extra carbohydrate as sugar. And so this can be a sign that you're eating too many carbs for you. So you could sort of reflect on what is the meal you're eating? What are the carbohydrates? That would be things you can mash, like a potato or a sweet potato, or a bread or a cracker, bars, fruits. Those are all carbohydrates. So if you have this problem with energy where you're really sleepy after meals, but then, sometimes even people then have trouble sleeping at night, it's probably a sign that your blood sugar is out of whack. When there's too many triglycerides being produced over a long time, like the person is experiencing these blood sugar swings, then they'll develop things like fatty liver and have problems with obesity. Don't think you have many men with us today. So to save time, you guys can text, you can chat, put a message in the chat if I'm wrong. I'm just going to briefly touch on male issues, and we could certainly go over men's issues more. It's very similar actually to women. The same lifestyle practices affect men and women very similarly. When men have a hormonal issue stemming from blood sugar problems, they'll experience problems with sleep, problems with low testosterone, irritable, low energy, moody, memory issues. And this is because then their blood sugar surges, they get an upregulation of the enzyme called aromatase. And this takes the great amount of testosterone they're making and they start converting it to estrogen. And that's not good because that results in the moodiness and feeling weak and feeling sleepy. Not good things. And that abnormal ratio of testosterone to the more estrogen they're making makes them more insulin resistant. So they're making even more insulin whenever they eat. And it's just sort of a vicious cycle. Furthermore, that imbalance of testosterone to estrogen ratio, I've got it written here as abnormal T to E ratio, results in more inflammation. It basically makes their immune system more reactive. So inflammation can show up as joint pain. It can show up as a mental, emotional health state. So feeling very moody, feeling anxious, feeling depressed. It could show up as brain fog. So there's many different ways that inflammation could show up. It could be a chronic muscle problem. So many ways inflammation shows up. But inflammation is promoted by this imbalance in testosterone to estrogen that they get from eating too many carbohydrates for them. And then that sort of just continues to perpetuate the vicious cycle. So hopefully you kind of get the idea there. That it's really important to have good blood sugar control. So basically, the more carbohydrates men eat, the more sugar they take in, the lower their testosterone is going to get and the higher their estrogen gets. So it's very important to zero in on some healthy approaches to diet. Building muscle also helps a lot with blood sugar control because the more muscle, and this is true for women too, the more muscle you've got, the less insulin resistant you are, the better your metabolism is. So you want to do things that improve your metabolism. You want to be in the sunlight. You want to be active doing strength training, and you want to, have your diet dialed in, and you want to have good sleep. Later in the talk, we'll talk a little bit about the light environment, like blue light versus red light, and that affects blood sugar control too. So if you're feeling like, maybe completely dialing your diet in to be the perfect diet is not for you, there's still all these other things you can be doing that will pay off and really be helpful with reaching your goal. But ultimately, the amount of carbs and sugars you are putting in your mouth does have a big impact on hormones. And so you do want to sort of keep working on improving those habits, even if you have some resistance to them. Oh, yay. Good. I checked the chat. We have some men. Okay, good that I'm talking about this then. The other thing that really helps men is an anti-inflammatory diet. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I think I'm a little bit outside of the norm. A lot of people, when they say anti-inflammatory diet, mean Mediterranean diet, and that's not what I mean. I think a lot of things about the Mediterranean diet are very good. The emphasis on fish and seafood, the emphasis on lots of fruits and vegetables, sure, that's all great. Nuts, yes. But emphasis on whole grains, that's just going to work against blood sugar control for most people. And grains are very inflammatory for the gut, which plays a big role in eliminating the excess hormones we don't need. So I think more like a paleo diet, and I'll talk more specifically about that, is going to be a more ideal diet for a lot of people. So for women, it's very similar to men. When we have blood sugar problems, it can result in a lot of these hormonal problems. So we'll be irritable. We'll have problems sleeping, which of course creates a lot of other problems for us. We may have menstrual flooding, which is where you have a heavy period, very extensive heavy period. I have another article on my website about menstrual flooding if you're looking for herbal techniques to help stop it. And then working at the root issues of hormone balance and healthy diet are really important for that. Women will have hot flashes, low energy, cravings. They may have things like PCOS and other issues, PMS, stemming from this blood sugar imbalance. For women, I feel like I'm missing a slide here. Maybe it'll come up a little later. For women, it's very important to keep, for most of us, to keep progesterone levels high, because progesterone is usually the one getting the short end of the stick when there's stress or when there's an inadequate diet present. So eating more sugar tends to drive down progesterone, which of course will drive down fertility and create a lot of problems in our hormonal cycles. And even when we're postmenopausal, this will create a lot of issues, brain-based issues, sleep issues, when we don't have adequate progesterone. So we want to think about how are we eating? How are we nourishing our body? Ultimately, if you can really dial in how you're nourishing your body, work on it over time. It's not like it needs to be perfect overnight. That is going to have a big payoff in terms of hormone balance. Just had a couple more people joining, so I'm just muting so we don't get any feedback. Okay. So this is a scenario maybe where someone's skipping breakfast and just starting with coffee with a stimulant. Stimulants like coffee ultimately lead to a blood sugar crash. So they're not very helpful for hormonal balance. They also tend to lead to cortisol spikes and dips, which create other hormonal problems. Then it's very typical for someone in our country to eat a high allergen lunch, like a bagel, which is a wheat-based. So that can be sort of aggravating gut and liver issues and affecting our hormones. And then because maybe they didn't really nourish themselves by starting off the day right, they might actually end up needing to eat or wanting something sweet at night. Which is again going to create that insulin surge, which is sort of perpetuating the hormonal balance. So you want to sort of think about these, maybe if you have dysfunctional patterns of eating, maybe looking at those and thinking about, how can you really nourish yourself better and get out of that pattern. So you want to be eating things like grass-fed beef or grass-fed bison, pastured animals, foods, wild seafood, wild fish, lots and lots of vegetables. The vegetables help feed the good bacteria, which are important for hormone balance because it helps eliminate the hormones your body is ready to let go of. And instead of maybe proteins, vegetarian proteins that are very aggravating to the gut, or grain based starches, which are also very aggravating, thinking more about vegetable based starches and carbohydrates in the diet. And like I said before, it's really important to emphasize protein and fat. So what's pictured here is salmon, which is a great example of a protein that's relatively easy to digest and very high in omega-3 and the essential fatty acids. And you need to be eating some protein and fat. Most people do every 3 to 4 hours throughout the day to help with balancing blood sugar and maintaining healthy cortisol levels. There's like a tree trimmer making some chipping in the background, so maybe message me if you can't hear me. So overall, one of the things that can really help with blood sugar control is eating balanced meals that are at a dependable time. Our bodies, and scientific studies are showing this more and more every day, that our bodies rely on a circadian rhythm, which means it's good to fall asleep at the same early time every night, wake up at the same time, fast for a certain amount of time overnight, break your fast, have lunch at a dependable time and dinner at a dependable time. So if you're not doing that, just starting to do that will actually translate into a lot of benefits. And they've been seeing that having a healthy circadian rhythm around how you eat your meals and when you're fasting translates to disease prevention. And I have a note here, especially breakfast and lunch. I think this is where a lot of people really skimp. Most people at dinner are eating a good protein. They're eating a lot of vegetables, some good quality fats, but at their other meals, they're maybe eating more processed things or just eating a lot of carbohydrates. So making sure you're getting a good protein and some veggies to feed those good bacteria at breakfast and lunch, dialing back on the carbohydrates can really help with the blood sugar dysfunction. Cravings are one of the main signs that there's a blood sugar dysfunction. So if you're craving sweets, then you know that your blood sugar is probably swinging too high. It may be swinging too low as well. So besides feeling really sleepy or lethargic and having energy problems, any kind of strong craving for sweets and carbohydrates is going to be like a red flag. I need to start thinking about more protein and more fat, more consistent meals, nourishing myself, more my body when it's asking to be nourished. Because if you don't do that, you can think of sugar as kind of like an emergency food. It's just your body wants sugar because it needs something then. And so you can overcome that by eating better. And then the last point here is avoiding common allergens because they're difficult to digest and often create unhealthy craving cycles. So many people will eat vegetarian proteins, for example, a lot of them which can be from soy or denatured soy, which is very aggravating and inflammatory for the body. Or they might want to eat other big legumes like garbanzos or hummus. Those are some of the foods that are most difficult for the digestive system and so can tend to set someone up for unhealthy cycles. So I actually find in practice, I know some people have limited diets, and this is not meant at all to be a one size fits all, but I find in practice, people tend to do a little bit better eating the animal proteins that they can handle. These are some of the top allergens. So gluten is the protein found in wheat and rye and barley and things like couscous and tabbouleh. Gluten has been bred to be like a mega frankenfood. So it's got 8 or 9 peptides when you look closely at the molecular structure. And if you really want to get into this, I encourage you to go to my website and listen to my leaky gut talk because I talk a lot more in depth about this. But basically, because gluten's got this large molecular peptide, it's a target for the immune system and it's a trigger for chronic inflammation for many people. Sugar would be the next thing. We already talked about how sugar promotes insulin production, and that's going to throw all your hormones out of whack. Dairy is very much like gluten in that it has a large molecular peptide structure. So if someone's got a lot of existing inflammation happening, they've got the joint pain, they've got mental, emotional health issues, they've got energy problems, then it can really help if you've got a lot of signs of inflammation to eliminate dairy, at least for a little while, with these other foods. because you will see a reduction in inflammation. Corn is very similar to gluten. In fact, it has its own gluten or protein segment. And so many times that's a trigger for people who already have a lot of hormone imbalances and inflammation. Soy, I already mentioned, being a legume with a large peptide structure, it also is a trigger for inflammation. So people with hormone imbalances that are very strong are going to have the associated inflammatory soup happening in their body, and soy is going to sort of perpetuate that. The other problem with a lot of soy-based foods is that soy is very naturally estrogenic. And so if someone is in an estrogen dominant state, then it's not going to lend itself well to help them get better. And of course, peanut is a common allergen and a trigger for the immune system. Again, it's a legume and has a pretty large peptide structure. So once the dietary piece is dialed in, you can get further reduction in inflammation stemming from hormone problems by using some superfoods. So turmeric is pictured here. It's a root. You can eat it. You can use the powder. You can get it in supplement form. Resveratrol is similar, just many, many health benefits. Too many to go into right now, but another great herbal superfood that helps with hormone detoxification and also helps with immune modulation, which helps the immune system basically to make better decisions about what's triggering inflammation in the body and what shouldn't. And then finally, EFAs, or essential fatty acids, especially omega-3. Omega-3s come from fish and seafood. And the more omega-3s you've got, the more your body can address inflammation and bring it back under control. Especially eating seafood at least 3 times a week is really beneficial for getting enough omega-3. Okay, so we just spent a while talking about the number 1 priority, which is blood sugar control. So the take-home message from this is to work on reducing the carbs and sugars that you're taking in. And to do that, if you eat protein, it'll help you with that, but eating more protein and good fats is going to help stabilize your blood sugar, so you're not going to have the blood sugar swings. So that's kind of the main message there. The second priority is essential fatty acids. So a lot of people with hormonal imbalance are just not eating enough fat, or they're not digesting the fat, or they have an imbalance in the right kinds of fats. So not to make it seem overly complicated, but there's different fats in all the foods, and some of them trigger inflammation and some of them help you to be healthy and work against inflammation. When you have enough essential fatty acids and they're in the right balance, they actually help optimize your hormone signaling. So if you're not getting enough food, you've got a very starch heavy diet, for example, overall, not eating enough fat, and you've got a starch heavy diet overall, then you may not have enough fats for your cells to really get the message. So maybe your hormone levels look okay, but your cells aren't getting the message because you're not getting enough of the right fat. So that's what this section is about. So some examples of fats besides the salmon I was picturing, which of course has its own healthy omega-3s, would be nuts and seeds like walnuts, coconut oil, unrefined fats, of course, olives, eggs. Last month, I just gave a whole talk about fats. So you can watch this webinar. I'll be posting it in a week or two, and you can watch all of the previous webinars I've given on my website, humannaturellc.com. So if you want to do a deeper dive into fats, I encourage you to check that out. Like I said, the different fats are made up of different components. So there's omega-3, there's omega-6, there's omega-9. Just to summarize, most people that I talk with are not getting enough omega-3. So that would be this upper section of the visual. Omega-3s come from fish and flaxseed and seafood, and that's about it. Yeah, maybe there's some algae out there too. But the problem with most Americans' diet in relation to being optimally healthy and hormonal health is that we eat a lot of omega-6 based foods. Basically all the plant-based foods except for flax and some microalgae are all omega-6. And if the animal foods you're eating are raised on grain and soy, which a lot of them are because it's cheap, then that's all going to be omega-6 heavy too. And so you really have to work on prioritizing the omega-3 foods. So if you love fish and seafood, you are going to love this because you can pretty much eat as many of those foods as you want. The benefit to eating those foods is going to be worth any trade-off to eating them. It's important to eat cold, wild species, so you don't want to be eating farmed species or ones that have been fed corn or soy or really big steak. So you don't want to be eating a lot of like big tuna steak, which would have a lot of mercury. But setting those things aside, eating an overabundance of fish and seafood is only going to be very beneficial for hormonal signaling. Flaxseed can be okay for some people, but most people who have inflammation and blood sugar control problems cannot metabolize flaxseed. That is what we've seen in the scientific literature. But everybody can metabolize fish and seafood. So if you can digest fish and seafood, that's going to be your go-to for trying to get more essential fatty acids. So one of the things I do when I'm working with people one-on-one is usually, how often do you eat fish? Can you eat fish 4 or 5 times a week? Yes. Okay, go for it. Because it's just a beneficial protein. It's a beneficial fat. It's going to translate to blood sugar control. It's also going to be very anti-inflammatory for the person and provide those essential fatty acids that helps with hormonal signaling. Sometimes it really helps to measure to know where you're at. Some people might think, well, I eat so great. I don't understand why I have this problem. And so sometimes getting in there and really beginning to measure the data to see what the problem is helps. In this case, there is an omega-3 index test. So I offer this through my office. It's about $50 or $60. And it's a home test where you prick your finger and give them a blood sample. You send it to the lab and then they tell us, how are you doing? Are you getting too many omega-6s or not? How are you doing with omega-3s? And so that can provide an incentive. This is just a summary of what we already talked about. The EFAs basically convert into prostaglandins that all your tissues need, and then they really help with sexual hormone function, adrenal hormone function, neurotransmitter, which is the hormones our nervous system make. When you're eating enough healthy fats, the hormones are basically going to do their job better. Probably everybody here who's tuned in today knows that margarine's not good, but just in case, you don't want to eat margarine because it's trans fat, and you don't want to eat out a lot. A lot of the restaurants use high omega-6 oil, so that's corn and safflower, and they may not be using margarine, but if they're not always throwing out their fry oil, then the things that they're frying things in back in the kitchen become trans fats when they're heated over and over again. I get a lot of questions too about the earth balance, which is like a vegetable oil based product in a tub. And I wouldn't recommend that either. It is not trans fat, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's basically all omega-6. So why would you add more omega-6 to your diet? You need to be thinking about omega-3s, overall. I rarely see an individual where their situation is opposite of that. If you're looking for what fats to use, then think about butter, clarified butter, unrefined coconut oil, or lard, duck fat, things from your kitchen from preparing, or you can buy lard, you can buy duck fat if you're not preparing roasts and things where you're getting that fat naturally. Those are all great for cooking at high temperatures. Of course, olive oil is excellent when it's cold pressed and not overly heated. So the big problem with trans fats is basically that it blocks your hormonal signaling. So somebody who's eating out a lot, getting a lot of trans fats is going to have hormone problems and problems with getting the message to their cells that they've got enough progesterone or they've got enough testosterone. Other ways to get down to the nitty gritty to see if you're eating enough fat would be to get a lipid panel done and work with me or work with someone like me. We're going to look at your blood tests. Somebody trained in functional medicine like myself is going to look at your blood tests very differently than most of your medical doctors will. So for example, this is a lipid panel, which is a basic test. I can do this for people through my office. You can ask for it through your doctor. It's usually very affordable, like $10 or $15. And when you see this total cholesterol number, actually, one example of a lot of cases I see is that someone's cholesterol is too low. This will happen in particular with a lot of women who are very capable, strong, out in the world, doing all these great things, raising their families. But they're using their cholesterol to handle stress, which is physiologically normal. So cholesterol is the basic hormone for testosterone, for progesterone, for estrogen. You've got to have an adequate cholesterol store. So if you're kind of skimping on eating fat and you're under stress, a lot of times you'll mine your cholesterol level down. So I never want to see a cholesterol level below 150, because then I know the person's probably not, they do not have enough cholesterol reserves to make a healthy level of hormones. So this person was at 156. That's a little shy, not quite where we want it. The HDL is not bad at 75. Triglycerides not bad at 56. I can tell this person is not eating a lot of carbohydrates because those triglycerides are nice and low. The glucose is another common test. You can have this done again with your doctor or with a glucometer at home or on a comprehensive metabolic panel. Glucose of around 83, 85 is like perfect when the person is fasting. When I see a glucose level getting up into the 90s, especially the high 90s, then I'm going to be thinking this person is headed for blood sugar problems. And that's the main way we have to work on reducing their inflammation and helping their hormone health status. If the glucose is low, like 70, 75, you sometimes see this in kids. And again, in like the active, stressed out individual, the person's not eating enough fat in that situation or not digesting enough fat to keep their blood sugar balanced overnight while they're fasting. Here's another example of a lipid panel where you can see the triglycerides are really high at 166. So in this case, a person is typically eating too many carbohydrates for them. They're not moving enough, or they're just eating more carbohydrates than their body can handle. And this number is actually way more important in my review than cholesterol or LDL in terms of somebody's heart health status, because the research says that this number, the triglycerides over their good fat value, HDL, is the most important ratio in that scientists think in terms of whether or not they're at high risk for a cardiovascular issue. So comes back again to controlling carbohydrates and having the right amount of carbohydrates for you. Okay, so we talked about blood sugar control, and we talked about having plenty of essential fatty acids. So to have plenty of essential fatty acids, you can do lots of seafood, lots of fish, lots of other high fat foods, and flaxseed for those individuals who don't already have blood sugar problems or a lot of inflammation. So the third piece is healthy liver biotransformation. So the liver basically works on detoxifying all of the chemicals that we get exposed to, and the liver also eliminates the hormones that we no longer need. So this is especially important. This is important for men if they go through phases where they're metabolizing into excess estrogen. The liver is going to help metabolize that extra estrogen out. For women, because we have a monthly cycle where estrogen and progesterone are waxing and waning, we want those estrogens moving out of the bloodstream. That's what the liver helps do, into the bowel movement and out of the body. So there's a liver gut connection that is very important too. So basically the liver's helping clear these extra hormones. And one of the pieces of hormone health that has to do with lifestyle choices is how much plastic are you consuming? How many obesogens or chemicals in your food are you consuming? So fructose, high fructose corn syrup, is a highly processed sweetener that acts as an obesogen. It's very stressful to the liver and basically causes a lot of hormone disruption and leads to hormone problems and obesity. Other things like bisphenol A, BPA, which is the plastic that's in cans. So it can be very helpful for someone who's looking to improve hormone health to avoid eating canned food and avoid eating processed food, because processed food is basically got a lot of chemical additives in it. And a lot of those chemicals act as obesogens, which means that they're sort of blocking the body's ability um, to clear hormones, and they sort of these chemical obesogens will act like hormones in your body and kind of sit on the hormone receptor site of your cells and not let your natural hormones get in there and do the right messaging. So eliminating processed foods for our children. I can't tell you how much processed food is in the school system. There's a lot of processed food there. But also just, going to Starbucks and getting a cup with a plastic lid. You got that hot drink with the steam rising up. That's resulting in plastic that's precipitating down into your drink. Or when you go and you get takeout and you're getting food in plastic and in styrofoam. So our body has to metabolize all those different chemicals. And it can, but if you have a lifestyle where you're doing that all the time, then you're going to be increasing the burden on your body and its ability. And some people are just not as good at clearing things out of the liver and specific chemicals out of the liver as others. So I have a whole nother talk about this actually next month when we talk about food-based cleansing. We'll talk a little further about liver detoxification and biotransformation. So I hope you guys will all check in. But as I mentioned already, the liver also helps clear out the estrogens, specifically when we no longer need them. So it's very important for hormone balance to have a healthy liver. The things that help with a healthy liver are bitter foods. So that would be like bitter greens, like dandelion, or bitter herbs that you can take in a tea, or sour foods like lemon, Granny Smith apple, are just some examples. Bitter melon, cruciferous vegetables. So that would be things like broccoli and cauliflower, arugula, radish. Those provide nutritional precursors to help the liver do its job in clearing out hormones and unnatural chemicals that look like hormones. Having good probiotics in the gut helps, because obviously after the liver filters the blood, it's going to move things into the bowel, and you've got to have healthy bowel for things to make it all the way out of your body. Sulfur is a very important mineral, and just a quick example of that would be like an Epsom salt bath. As well as protein. The liver really needs adequate protein. So again, I've got another plug for more protein. And I think I've been working with people for 15 years. I've been providing these one-on-one sessions at the co-op for 14 years. And one of the most common trends I do see is that people are not eating enough protein. And I think nationwide, you get a lot of messages maybe that you shouldn't be eating very much protein or you shouldn't be eating very much fat. And I think that's too bad, because I started off my career sort of with more of that mainstream thinking. And then the more I worked with people, the more I began to realize how important it is for a person to be getting and digesting adequate protein. And that protein provides some amino acids that allow the liver to detoxify itself. So I actually wrote a book all about this. It's called The Body Tune-Up. And I'm just giving you a plug for it now because it's all about this liver detoxification and biotransformation and how to eat your way into supporting that. And next month's lecture is going to be based on this. You can get my book at the Madison Public Library, or you can get it from my website or Amazon. But if you're looking for more detailed information as far as how to eat to help with that process, this is one resource. And then, as I mentioned, the liver works very closely with the gut. So it may seem like we're getting kind of far afield from working with hormones here, but we're trying to work at the root causes of the hormone imbalance to begin with. So you've got to have a healthy gut in order to absorb the things you need, and you've got to have a healthy gut in order to balance your hormones. This is a visual from a study, what's called a meta-analysis, where they look at all of the studies that have been done and the conclusions therein. And I put this up here because I think it's really interesting. It's showing how, as we're aging, and this is particularly in reference to women, our hormone levels are dropping. And so we have experienced lower estrogen and lower testosterone. And this meta-analysis actually showed that it's a very common trend when those levels are dropping to experience more inflammation, and as a result, to be experiencing more cognitive changes. So dementia, Alzheimer's, memory problems, verbal, spatial, attention issues, all of those can relate back to the hormone levels being inadequate. And it's commonplace to address low hormone levels either by saying, well, you're aging, so that's normal, which is, I find, not very helpful or productive, or let's give you this hormone to take the place of the hormone you weren't making. And there are definitely situations where that is invaluable, and I'm not trying to argue that, but these approaches sometimes don't really correct the inflammatory cycle that began and kind of took on a life of its own because of the lower hormones and the cognitive changes that have resulted. And so I just wanted to put this in reference to say, you know, these 4 priorities that I'm talking about, it's really important to work in these areas to help correct the inflammatory issues and help resolve the cognitive changes that are happening. So this is just a summary. Sometimes there's something else triggering inflammation for the person, because like I demonstrated in the beginning when we were talking about blood sugar, you know, there's sort of a whole mess of things that start happening once you lose blood sugar control and you've got a hormone imbalance happening. So you've got to think a little bit broader than just hormone replacement in order for the person to really be well and experience optimum health. So one of the things to do, besides what I've already talked about up to this point, is to look at the gut health. And I have a whole nother lecture on leaky gut, so you can go to my website and check that out. But if you've never heard of leaky gut before, basically the gut lining is 1 cell layer thick. It's very vulnerable. And when we're under stress, the layers pull apart, and the screening out process of food coming into your body is no longer working. So now food is getting through that gut lining, and your bloodstream is underneath, and your immune system is underneath, and it's reacting. And you may not have a tummy ache, you may not have any digestive issue, but you've got leaky gut because you've got autoimmunity and inflammation or cancer or other problems elsewhere in your body that stem from this gut problem. So I'm sort of going to overview this quickly since we just have a few minutes left. There's a number of healthy supplements that help with leaky gut. And honestly, doing what's called a GI map, which is an in-depth stool testing, is really invaluable if you really want to repair your gut. But working on being in the sunshine and getting adequate vitamin D levels from being in the sun in the summer, healthy gut flora. There are supplements that help repair leaky gut, like glutamine and iron, and taking nutritional precursors that help with glutathione, like N-acetylcysteine and glycine. Those all really help with the gut piece and making sure your gut is healthy. You know, you want to be regular, you want to have regular, healthy bowel movements. Otherwise, those hormones that you're trying to balance and detox, it's just not going to work if things aren't moving out of your body when they need to move out. There's a special diet for leaky gut too, when someone's got so much inflammation and it's stemming from this disrupted gut. And it's basically what I was talking about for like a basic paleo diet. So meat, fish, fresh produce, healthy fats, instead of eating grains, eating root vegetables if you're eating carbohydrates in your diet. So This slide is just summarizing everything we talked about so far. And I just want to spend the last couple minutes talking about some of the most common profiles I see with hormones and some of the natural things that are alternatives to taking hormones. I like to use the ZRT lab for hormone testing. It's a home-based saliva test. I also like diagnostic labs. There's a lot of the Dutch test, there's a lot of good tests out there. The most common pattern I see in women is that they have low levels of progesterone and they have too much estrogen. And so that can result in all of these symptoms. Although you can't just take one of these symptoms and say, oh, it's low progesterone. Like, you really do need to measure to know what's going on with a person's hormones, because someone, for example, could have night sweats from not having enough estrogen. So the symptom doesn't always correlate with this pattern, even though this pattern is most predominant. So an alternative way of addressing a low progesterone, high estrogen imbalance for someone would be working with them on stress relief. And I know that is easier to say than do, but it's so important because the hormone balance is stemming from the person using their reserves in their body to respond to a stress rather than using those reserves to make healthy hormones. So looking at the stressors, doing what you can to resolve that, even if it's long-term. Adrenal support is so important because the adrenals are what respond to stress. And so if you don't have good cortisol regulation and good adrenal support, you're not going to be successful in balancing hormones. And then there are some helpful supplements that help boost progesterone, and supplements that can help with eliminating excess estrogen in a profile like this. So we're kind of out of time. So I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna sort of breeze through this. These are just some suggestions of ways that can help, getting enough sleep, having time that's not scheduled, meditating, adrenal support. I have a whole nother talk about adrenal support and stress relief that will go into more detail. But these are a lot of the natural things that can be very helpful. Many of you are probably already familiar with a lot of these. I'd like to emphasize the red light therapy at the bottom, because you can get like a $10 red light bulb, and the red light, which is naturally present at sunrise and sunset and present all day long, but strongest at those times, is really good at helping with cortisol management. And then just to give you some alternatives to taking like a progesterone cream or taking a progesterone prescription would be, there's an over-the-counter supplement called pregnenolone that helps, that is a precursor to making progesterone. So you're sort of giving your body some more raw material so it can make the hormones. I find that works really well. Chaste extract is an herbal remedy that can help a lot with signaling the pituitary with progesterone production. And then there are supplements that help with lowering estrogen. So we already talked about the importance of the liver here, and things like DIM, I3C, chaldeglucarate. These are all typically extracted from the members of the broccoli plant family and can be really helpful. And then, yeah, a lot of these other things like blood sugar control and fats and diet we already talked about. So just wanted to give you a picture there for how to help with a high progesterone or low progesterone, high estrogen profile. In other cases, there might be issues with high testosterone or high testosterone metabolite. So high testosterone might be like PCOS. And in that case, we want to work primarily on blood sugar control. But when men and women do not metabolize testosterone ideally, when there's blood sugar swings, then there's more hair loss, there's more acne, more moodiness. One of the most helpful supplements for this is saw palmetto. So I really like to use that a lot in this kind of scenario. And then, of course, working on reducing inflammation, turmeric and resveratrol really help with hormone balance in a scenario like this, as well as a lot of liver support. And when you are making a specific change for your hormones, especially if you're taking like pregnenolone or another precursor, DHEA, remember that, it takes a few months for your body to adjust. hormonally. So I typically recommend going slow, make a change for about 3 months and sort of reevaluate where you are rather than taking like a lot of different supplements that will affect your hormone level at once, because then it can be sort of difficult to tease out what's happening. Okay, we made it through all the material. Just another plug that I have monthly sessions through the co-op, either Zoom or in person at Willie West. Right now I'm scheduling for August, so reach out to me if you're interested. I hope you'll join me at next month's lecture, which is the last Wednesday at noon. And that book that I mentioned I wrote, The Body Tune-Up, it talks about balancing hormones through liver health and a healthy diet. I take a group of people through a 6-week workshop every year so that you get the group support of making these types of changes. And so I start that every October. I'll be doing that this October. So if you want to be connected with me, you can reach out, send me an email, or subscribe to my newsletter, and you can get linked into the scholarships and the registration information about that. There's the book, and thank you so much.